Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Metzler, one of the programmers here with the Green Film Festival of San Francisco, presented by SF Indie Fest. We're still in this kind of topsy-turvy world of the pandemic, but there's still filmmakers creating really great films, and we're excited to bring them here to the Bay Area. You've just seen the great film, A Machine to Live In, and it was just kind of a really special treat to kind of run across. And we're lucky enough to have the filmmakers, Yoni Goldstein and Meredith Zelke here. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Very cool. I think maybe a good place to start is, what was the kind of initial inspiration for the film, and how did you know there was this kind of story that you wanted to tell?
Sure, maybe I'll kick off.
Yeah.
So A Machine to Live In is for us really kind of a meeting point of different kinds of disciplines, different kinds of like artistic practices. Our core team is myself and Meredith, Andrew Benz, who was director of photography and EP, and Sebastian Alvarez, who was our producer and researcher, creative. And the idea of the film was really to examine the space, which is really kind of like this kind of like space age utopian architectural project that was founded in 1960, inaugurated in 1960. And then looking at different ways in which we can understand the built environment. So we're talking to poets, we're talking to urban designers, we're talking to UFOologists, spiritualists, astronomers, historians, and sort of like figuring out in sort of like this prismatic way, different ways that we can sing about the city, compose poems about the city, philosophize, criticize, image, deconstruct, reconstruct. All these ways are ways in which kind of like these are all like portals of inspiration which defined our various experiences in Brasilia.
So with that in mind, as you guys approached making the film, it's like, how do you kind of organize your thoughts, or kind of also figure out who you want to reach out to kind of be part of this mosaic of the film that you made? Was it just people that you kind of ran across in the street? Was it like word of mouth? It's like this in these kind of essay films, it's like, how do you kind of organize your thoughts more in the editorial room or in the process of making it?
It was kind of both. So we've been making this film. We made this film over the past 8 years. It took 8 years to make. So really, we all had different life schedules that we were working around. So we ended up going just over the summers, also because the climate in Brasilia was it just cinematically perfect for what we needed it to look like. Really, in the other part of the seasons, it's raining all the time. And then when we chose to go every summer, our summers, it was hot and dry and the soil was orange. And so we wanted it to look as, I guess, Martian as possible, for lack of a better term. And then, so we went every summer for 8 years. And what happens with that schedule is you just end up meeting people and folding them in as they're appropriate and inspiring. So we started off with a skeleton, a backbone for the film that really circled around ideas, and we centered our film around the writing of Clarice Lispector, which we already had in mind, and then we met the poet laureate of the city of Brasilia, whose name is Nicholas Baer, and he wrote several books and poetry about the city itself. And so he was part of the mosaic. He introduced us to a lot of people. We actually met him through a professor in Chicago who specializes in bio art, and so they knew each other from being in the same city and being artists. And And then we met, we eventually developed ideas through the editing process. And so we put things together and then we moved it over and smashed it with something else. And it kind of created new ideas. And so we approached the children's choir, and then we approached the, Brazil and a lot of Latin America has the same TV announcer for all of their TV shows and their major cable networks. And so we approached him to do part of the voice acting in our piece. And the numerologist and a woman who's a part of the UFO community, we met them all through lots of visiting, lots of mutual trust building. And then, over the course of the years, we eventually started filming with them, and then they took on different characters as well. So it's kind of both of what you're saying. We had a lot of research going in, a lot of the ideas and the concepts that went into the script work. And then we met people, and then the ideas clashed and built through editing. And then we started at our last trip there, we started working with creating the first 3D architectural scans of the city, and in the cities in the periphery, including the UFO communities that we followed. So through that collaboration that we did with one of our friends who did all the scans, then that built in a whole different level of navigation through the film, both architecturally and conceptually.
Well, yeah, it seems like such an organic process. When you first started making the film, and then with all this, time in the city, were there certain kind of assumptions or presumptions you had about the film you wanted to make versus after experiencing it? How do you think that evolved or changed?
You want to take that, Jens?
Sure. Well, so we always had this notion of that this is going to be a film that looks at architecture as a container of power, and also and that it would be constructed through a series of landscapes that will somehow, give us different contours of, what architecture, the idea of like architecture for all or built environment for all could be, and sort of all these like potential utopian ideas that were swirling around and that were creating other utopian ideas, which are expressing themselves in these like mystical and metaphysical dimensions, right? And that has always been the core of the film, and we knew that the film will be sort of like grounded in the material experience of these environments, first like in Brasilia, and then we'll kind of like radiate outwards into the various like satellite cities that historically actually were sort of like developed in the same time, and were sort of like these like parallel communities to Brasilia. But then there were a lot of thought that went into the writing and into the editing in order to create this perspective of the film, right? And the perspective of the film, it became clear to us that it was a fragmented perspective, that it had to be some sort of distributed intelligence that expressed some sort of collective subjectivity, right? It couldn't be like a single top-down narration, because Brasilia as an architectural environment was designed with this kind of like top-down view on how to kind of like rationally organize society and how to rationally organize the flow of of labor, and how to the flow of power between certain sets of like monumental structures and capital buildings and government centers. So we wanted, I think, from the beginning to subvert that somehow. And there was a question like, will this be a film in which there's like a voiceover narration at all? Would there be how how can we take out that sort of voice of God, which narration is often associated with, and rather create like a internal system in which like the buildings themselves are containing voices, and those voices get mediated and modulated by the environment, and sometimes like in it, and sometimes sort of like in opposition to it, right? We get a lot of like textures of sounds that are very sort of finite and tangible, right? And they have to do with the like the material itself, but at the same time we might be flying away from it, right? And sort of creating these contrasts, and creating ways in which like the film itself is sort of like breaking apart in certain points. All of that, I think, grew out of our experiences making the film. Like keeping notes, keeping journals over the years. Like at one point, we were even sort of like thinking about like keeping a dream journal, as we were sort of like entering into these different transcendental spaces that have all these sort of conversations around like leaving the body, entering other bodies, being reincarnated, and that sort of like all that culminates in sort of like one of the last scenes in which like the sort of the two people that we follow in the film sort of incorporate the imaginary entities of Clarice Lispector, this sort of existentialist author who writes about sort of like the psychic anxieties of living there, and Oscar Niemeyer, the architect who designed the spaces, and was one of the chief architects of the city. And their conversation, which is about loss of and bereavement of a lost future, but also the possibilities of other futures like emerging from it, I think is sort of like the core thesis of the film, right? But to get there, we took a lot of, like Meredith said, we spent a lot of time navigating.
Do you think have the folks in Brasilia had a chance to see it, and what have they kind of said about seeing their city through your eyes? Or if they haven't seen it, what do you think the kind of response that might provoke?
You want to take that? Do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. So folks in Brasilia have seen it, and folks in Brazil as well. So in the other major metropoles where we've had screenings, and I think it's we knew from the start that it's a divisive film, right? There are definitely people who feel alienated by Brasilia, and they feel a kinship with the film, because the sort of one of the theses of the film is that Brasilia is an alien position in this landscape. And, like thinking about, the festival right now and sort of like its focus on environmental films, like we would definitely classify this as an environmental film, because the only real like utopia that you could say like exists there is the the sort of the savanna and the nearby like natural landscapes, which had to be demolished and flattened and completely destroyed in order for Brasilia to exist. And so people are aware of that, and I think that a lot of people connect to the film in Brazil like, in that way, right? And a lot of people are also, connecting to. I mean, like Clarice Lispector's writing is very well known. Well, she's a beloved writer, and so there's a certain layer of textuality that is very sort of obvious and relatable to Brazilians, right? That aren't necessarily to people outside of Brazil. There's all sorts of little references. There's a lot of sort of like local,
local knowledge.
Local knowledge that is in the film, right? That may not be accessible to other people. And yet there's also like people who watch the film who maybe were expecting a more conventional take on the sort of like the wonderful works of Oscar Niemeyer, who were really interested in kind of like a more sort of like sanitized history of Brasilia and Brazil, or maybe sort of uncomfortable with some of like the embedded critiques that the film has, which really is about this moment that we lived through, right, and we're still living through, in which like authoritarian impulses are being expressed through governments, but also through like the very architecture of the societies in which we live. So I mean that's the kind of feedback that we got, and yeah, like I don't know, it's
Very cool.
we always knew that it would be, like I said, like a challenging film in that regard.
Well, it's a really neat film, and I really appreciate you guys for creating it. As we kind of wrap up, anything you guys want to share with the audience, or what you want them to kind of ruminate on when they after they watch it?
Well, I think for me, this is Anais. I think for me, I want them to know. I want them to know something, and I want them to ruminate on something. What I want them to know is that, in the soundscape, we really included a lot of the original materiality of like geological materiality. When we were showing, when we were like placing you in the scene of the quarry and extracting earth in order to create these buildings, like Yoni said beautifully, this is an alien imposition into the land that was already there. And so that's just something to think about in terms of sound, one aspect of sound. And then another thing is, Jones, I think you mentioned this too before, that, this city was built in a way that whoever navigates the city it's supposed to control a population, like the way that these buildings were built, how separated they were, how huge they are, the fact that there were no sidewalks or no consideration of humans, and that navigation outside of using cars. I would just like to place people in this idea of social control, and that cities like Brasilia can be an alien imposition, and just to kind of consider all of our built environments around us.
Cool. Well, I think there's I'm spacing on the film. You guys, if you have a chance to, for those of you that just watched your film, is Dreaming an Island is a nice kind of contrast of a film. They kind of work out very well. So just again, thanks for making the film and being part of the festival.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to everyone who wanted to be here and watch.
Yeah, thank you so much, and of course, everybody's free to reach out to us. We're happy to continue the conversation.
Oh, I thought you were offering your apartment for everyone to stay
Yeah.
He's a nice guy like that.
Yeah.
Is there a Facebook page or social media that folks should gravitate to kind of share their thoughts or ask questions?
Our website
yes,
is amachinetolivin.com, which is an experience in and of itself.
Yeah, and we have a Facebook page as well, so feel free to hit us up there if you wish.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.